So 2014 is coming to an end, and we all know what that means. It's time to look back on all the games that came out and decide which one is worth the incredibly arbitrary and pointless title of Game of the Year. Since it's that time of the year again, I figured I could use this opportunity to try something new. Something different from my reviews, podcasts, live streams, and informative videos that involve my shitty Photoshop drawing abilities. So I thought in this crazy world of YouTube video game content we live in, I'd be unique and innovative and create a top 10 video. Yeah. However, I quickly realized I have a problem. From what I can recall, I didn't actually buy 10 games that came out in 2014, and even then, of the 9 games I bought, one I only thought was okay, another I didn't sink as much time into as I wanted, and another was a re-release of a game I'm already very familiar with. And so that left me with 6 games. The obvious solution would have been to make a top 5 video instead, but I felt like that would be a little short, and more importantly, not an accurate representation of my gaming experience in 2014. I played a lot of older games this year. Now, while part of this has to do with that one thing I do that you probably are familiar with, a large part of it also has to do with the fact that I've accumulated quite the backlog throughout the years, and it's going to take me a little while to burn through all of that. So instead of a Game of the Year list, I decided to make a Games I Played This Year list, or GIPTY if you prefer. Now with all of that out of the way, here it is. This is my list of the top 10 games I played in 2014. So let's get started with number 10. I'll be the first to admit, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure All-Star Battle has a lot of problems. It's not a perfect game by any means. I wasn't a fan of this game's usage of downloadable content. I also wasn't too thrilled with the fact that they managed to sneak a free-to-play gameplay model into the game's campaign mode, even though that this game was $50 when it first came out. In fact, that's kind of disgusting. As an actual fighting game, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure All-Star Battle is actually pretty bad. It only runs at 30 frames per second, and at launch there was a lot of weird shit in the game that really shouldn't have gotten through playtesting at all that has since been patched out, but seriously, take a look at this. It's very clear that the designers really didn't care too much about this game's status as a fighting game and the competitive scene. Rather, they seem to focus so much more on the fan service, and I gotta admit, as a JoJo fan, this game is everything I would want out of a JoJo game. Not necessarily a fighting game, but I think that this game shouldn't even be called a fighting game. I think this game kind of falls into its own genre of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Simulator. This game is flashy, it's stylish, it's fun, and most importantly to me, it has personality and it has heart. Licensed anime games come out every year, but what truly makes All-Star Battle special is that it's a celebration of the JoJo series up to this point. It doesn't really feel like a cash-in even though it probably is. This feels like a love letter from the designers to JoJo fans around the world. The time and effort they took to just go back through the manga and nail every little detail that they possibly could is just downright incredible and really makes All-Star Battle stand out from the rest of the anime licensed game crowd. Every single character is unique, most of them are really fun to play as, and half of the fun comes from seeing how the capabilities of these characters from the source material transition into a multiplayer game. Speaking of multiplayer, if you have friends that are also into JoJo and want to play along, this game is a blast. And if you want to play online with them, I actually found that, to my surprise, the netcode isn't half bad. Every single match that I've played, the connection was usually serviceable. You know, you get your errors once in a while, but I actually was kind of shocked at the overall quality of the online play. And that's where most of my enjoyment of this game actually came from. Just popping this game in with a couple of friends on a lazy summer day, whether offline or online. It was actually a lot more fun than I expected, and definitely worth the $50 that I spent for it at launch. If you look at this game as a fighting game, you're going to come away disappointed, and I honestly can't blame people for that. After all, we did have that JoJo's Bizarre Adventure fighting game made by Capcom that was actually really good as a fighting game in its own right. But if you look at this instead as a celebration of the series, it becomes a lot more enjoyable. This is a great game to pop in with a couple of friends and just to have a few matches while talking shit and having a good time, taking in the style and the wonder and the craziness of the JoJo's Bizarre Adventure world. I can't recommend this game for those of you who aren't already JoJo's fans. I also can't really recommend this game if you don't have any friends that are also into JoJo's that would want to play this along with you. However, if you are a JoJo fan, and you have friends that are also JoJo fans that would play this with you, I highly recommend All-Star Battle. I'm not going to lie, from a gameplay perspective, this is a game with many flaws, but at its core, I still find it enjoyable, and I find it worthy of the title of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Smash 4 was a weird experience for me. I actually wasn't incredibly interested in the title in the months prior to its release, but since it came out not too far away from my 21st birthday, I decided to give it a shot. As a result, I didn't follow the game as close as most people did, and the only thing I really kept up with were the character reveals. That said, I went into this game fairly blind, and my first reaction towards this game was kinda mixed. This game feels a bit rushed, and I'm under the impression that Nintendo put a lot more attention on the Wii U version, which, admittedly, was probably a wise decision on their part. I find a lot of the stages in this game come off feeling half-assed, and overall they're just not as fun as the ones found in Melee or Brawl. And finally, I was a little upset by the lack of single-player modes to mess around in compared to previous entries. Now, looking past all these issues, this game is still ridiculously fun. I find myself playing it all the time. The new characters are all fun to play as and make great additions to the already strong roster of fighters found in previous games. The online multiplayer mode is not entirely perfect, but still it's a major improvement over Brawl's awful multiplayer, and in my eyes it more than makes up for the game's lack of single-player content. Last but not least, this game's music is amazing. Also, thank you so much for including Magic Ant from Earthbound and Earthbound Zero as a stage in Nintendo. I really appreciated it. Mass Effect is a game I really wasn't expecting to play this year. However, two BioWare fangirl friends of mine kept talking about the series over the summer in depth, and it got me interested. I started talking to them about it, and one thing led to another, and they peer pressured me into buying the entire trilogy bundle for PS3. It also helps that I've been in the mood for a good Western RPG for a while now, and Mass Effect definitely helps fill that void. My desire for a good Western RPG, combined with the massive amounts of nostalgia I have for KOTOR 1 and 2, also known as the Persona 2 of BioWare games, really helped me get into Mass Effect. You know what's really cool? Space. Space is pretty fucking cool. You know what's even cooler? Having an interesting group of people to explore space with. And while I think the first two party members you get in Mass Effect are rather uninteresting and, in the case of Ashley, kind of a piece of shit human being,
I'm concerned about the aliens, Vicarian and Rex. With all due respect, Commander, should they have full access to the ship?
You don't trust their motives because they're not human.
This is the most advanced ship in the Alliance Navy. I don't think we should give them free rein to poke around the vital systems.
The other four party members you obtain throughout the story are a lot more interesting personality and backstory-wise, and they were my main drive for finishing the game. The characters are definitely what shine here. The main narrative itself really isn't anything special, but it does have some touches of Lovecraftian horror to it, which I actually really enjoyed. On the gameplay side of things, I was really impressed by this game's amount of customization options. In the character creator alone, I really enjoyed the fact that you had two different modifiers to establish your backstory before you even started playing the game. This game does a wonderful job on building a fictional universe, and then gives you a wide array of options on what you want to do within it. However, this game suffers from something that I like to call the Elder Scrolls problem, in which the majority of a game is really good, except for the actual combat. This game's combat feels like the developers put a bunch of half-thought-out ideas into a blender and then called it a day. Sometimes it really feels like Mass Effect's third-person shooter and RPG elements clash and trip over one another. I don't really understand the point of giving your game a cover system when half the time the enemy AI just decides to rush you anyways. This makes the game feel really claustrophobic, and not in a good way. Combine this with really bad partner AI and a really clunky inventory system, and it leaves Mass Effect's combat feeling really unpolished in an otherwise really polished game. That didn't stop me from enjoying the game, however, and sure enough, I'm already playing Mass Effect 2. So if you're listening to this and you're looking for a fun sci-fi adventure to play through, look no further than Mass Effect. I've always been a fan of fighting games, and, as those of you familiar with me already know, I'm also a big Persona fan. So when the original Persona 4 Arena was released, I was all over it. However, the game's small roster and some fairly annoying balance issues led to me putting the game down after a couple months. Persona 4 Arena Ultimax addressed both of these issues, offering an incredible variety of fighters to choose from, and ironing out many of the original game's issues as well. Arc System Works really went above and beyond for this one. Many anime fighters, especially ArcSys games, have a bad habit of piling complex system mechanics over complex system mechanics and alienating new players. Ultimax solves this by toning down the speed of the game, move inputs, and the combo complexity to be less intimidating than Guilty Gear and BlazBlue. While there are a lot of in-depth systems and movement options, the game does a great job of easing new players into them. That being said, the game doesn't sacrifice competitive balance for the sake of accessibility. Longtime fighting game players will find that Ultimax is a damn fine game, and it's sure to go down in history as one of the great anime fighters of the previous console generation. While the game's story is admittedly lackluster and the DLC is a little gross, these are problems common to the genre as a whole, and I can't really knock the game too much for these issues. Some people tend to call out Atlus for milking the Persona 3 and 4 games, but I think that if Ultimax shows us anything, it's that Atlus can take a pre-existing IP and expand upon it in a way that creates competent products. And most importantly, Ultimax introduced the greatest fighting game character of them all, Swag Minazuki.
Psych! That's the wrong number!
Oh, baby, a triple! Oh, yeah!
A very good day to you everyone. Today I want to tell you about a video game I recently played by the name of Persona 4. It's a very good game. I always felt lonely because I had no friends in real life. But Persona 4 has finally allowed me to live in a world of my own kawaii Japanese high school and reach out to the truth. I'd also like to state that she is objectively the best girl, and I'd fill her many states with love if she was real. On the other hand, I must sadly say that people who like Reset have absolutely poor taste in women.
Okay, let's try that again. Considering that I absolutely love Megami Tensei, it's probably a little strange it took me until this fall to play through the most popular entry in the franchise. I feel like I'm preaching to the choir here. Because if you watch my videos, you're probably already aware that Persona 4 has been praised by both critics and players alike, and for good reason. I think a large part of this game's successful reception has to do with the amount of polish found in each area of the game. The menus look slick, the combat is a lot smoother than it was in Persona 3, the writing is great, the plot moves at an engaging yet comfortable pace, and so on. But in my opinion, what truly made Persona 4 a hit was the game's relatable nature. To break out the pretentious critic vocabulary, Persona 4 is human. You are thrown into a cozy setting with fleshed out characters, each with their own personality quirks, goals, insecurities, anxieties, and attitudes. With every new dungeon that opens up, a significant amount of the plot's focus is spent introducing you to a new character, so even if you decide to not talk with them ever again in your playthrough, they still feel fleshed out, and even more importantly, you feel familiar with them before they even join the party. The town of Inaba itself will be familiar to anyone who's ever grown up in a smaller town, and as someone who grew up in the frozen wasteland known as the northern half of Wisconsin, I can safely say that the developers nailed the atmosphere. Unlike previous Persona games, the main cast of Persona 4 doesn't initially have a primary goal of saving the world from some abstract threat. The conflict is much more localized, and instead of trying to save all of humanity, the party is simply trying to save a couple people from falling prey to a serial killer. Whereas Persona 3 had a core theme of death, specifically talking about mortality and the meaning of one's life, Persona 4 has a core theme of truth, and the importance of both accepting yourself for who you are and looking at life in an honest manner. Most people don't like to think about mortality on a regular basis, to the point that many would claim that frequent thoughts about death or the meaning of existence is probably unhealthy and a sign of someone in a state of mental distress. On the other hand, truth and honest self-reflection is something encouraged by the majority of societies around the world, and is something the average human being probably thinks of and deals with a lot more often than death. At almost any given point in our life, we are made aware of our negative or unwanted personality traits and must find a way to cope with them. To tie all of this together, my point is that Persona 4 is a game that is incredibly easy to connect to, and that's reflected in the game's more down-to-earth style. I'd argue that Megami Tensei as a whole has always been a series that has an element of global appeal to it due to its lofty ideas generally being rooted deeply within the average human experience, but Persona 4 takes that global appeal and personalizes it. Chances are, if you've lived on this planet for any decent chunk of time, there is something in Persona 4 that will hit you deeply. That said, I wouldn't call Persona 4 a perfect game by any means. I think the best way I can describe Persona 4 is with the phrase consistent. And by that, I mean the game's quality doesn't fluctuate much. There was never a point in this game where I felt like the developers really screwed up, but at the same time there's never a point where I felt like they did something truly incredible either. While that sounds like a negative, it really isn't. It's impressive in its own right that a 70+ hour RPG manages to remain of such high quality all throughout, and just because a game doesn't go above and beyond, that doesn't also have to mean that it's bad. Despite what shitheads on the internet would have you believe, Persona 4 is a game worthy of its success. It might not be my favorite Mega 10, and it might not even be my favorite Persona title, but it's a good ride from start to finish. Unfortunately, I'm gonna need to stop here for now. My video editor is not cooperating with me anymore, and I think what's going on is that I just have too much things going on within the editor itself. So I'm gonna need to split up my top 10 into 2 separate videos, which I didn't really want to do, but hey, whatever. Part 2 will be up in a couple more days, and I hope you guys look forward to it.